Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today.
I think you need to share the screen. We're seeing KFSSI host.
Yes. Oh,
I do that quite often, as you've observed. And there it is. Okay.
and there it is, the wrong screen, right? How about now?
There, that's the one you're looking for, I think.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here. A beautiful Sunday afternoon, at least in my neck of the woods. I hope it's a harbinger of things to come. Here we are in 2025, and it's we've been going at this thing for quite a while, and we may be starting to harvest. This is what we need to do. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We've been discussing basic inertia. Today's topic is contention. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It's January the 19th, 2025. This is part of the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So we have been carrying on for several years here and trying to condense the information, but also to move ahead. And somehow we have to maintain a link to be able to help newcomers try and find that path so that they can literally catch up to a lot of us who've been around for a long time. And we can do this physically. And we're going to discuss a lot of that today because we're discussing contention. But we can speed up the whole process by doing it plasmatically. So the question then becomes, do we really understand what the difference is? So the problem that we're having here is that our beds are burning. That becomes a point of contention, doesn't it? And that contention revolves around race, religion, war, competition. And we're wondering, while this is going on, is anybody sleeping? Is it really possible to have contentment? And so when we talk about races, one of the races that has come up again has been the race to the moon. And as we see, the different planets have different number of moons. And we get to Mars that has 2 and Earth has 1 when you compare it to Jupiter, which has a total of 92. And you say, well, is that the race that they're talking about? Because since we have 1, we're in contention. And if you look at Venus and Mercury, they don't have any, so they're out of contention. Is that what we mean? Or are we having a race? A race maybe between camels, or maybe between birds, or actually, is it a race between camels and birds? I'm not sure. It's some kind of competition, and so you're welcome to place your bets. We all like to take gambles, right? And of course, these sports are governed by kings. That's why they call them the sport of kings, where the animals get treated like royalty. Even the athletes get treated like royalty. Do we call the animals athletes? Well, it all depends on how you look at it. The point of the matter is, all of this is a contention for bragging rights. So there you go. Now you have something tangible. But there's another kind of competition that's out there, and it involves tainted love. Is love really a competition? That the battle between the man and the woman, and if that battle is prolonged, then it turns to divorce. So divorce could certainly be a point of contention. And so there was a song, and it seems to be about a loving person, and loving a person who doesn't really love her back, but is needy. So he strings her along and just takes and takes and takes until she is all used up. And she wants out because of all of the pain. And this is the pain that he is causing her, but the love is still there pulling her back. And so that's what tainted love is. So they say. And what's pulling us back is we're stuck on the hesitancy highway, you see. And that's the lowest energy state, and we're very comfortable with it. But there's a lot of people that are blocking, and we ask our question, who is in the way? And who is in whose way? And as we're driving along, we need a good cup holder. And in the plasma science, we call them the cups of life. And we have to stay on track, right? But is life the cup of trophies? Is life the contention for trophies? Is that what life is all about? And as we're searching for the meaning of life, and we have to search for outer space, and we're contending in the battle to find.
Alex?
Oh.
Yes. Can I interrupt you for a minute? We're seeing KFSSI host EN on the screen for some reason. I don't know why, but it's blocking a small part of your presentation. Just to let you know, I think we can continue with it, but that is something I hadn't seen before.
Yeah, it's very large letters.
One moment, please.
It's on top of, can't read the word.
Yeah, it says outer space. It's covering up into outer space. That first line, it says KFSSI host EN.
Search for is underneath, yeah.
Just to let you know, I think we can deal with it. Or we can pause the recording and correct it. That's not a problem either. Or you can continue on.
It's totally blocking the screen.
I think we'll just work with it, Alex. It's not a major problem. But I didn't want you to see the recording and then say, how come nobody said that this was on
Yeah,
the screen?
exactly. How is it looking now?
Same.
There, still there.
Well, I thought I had everything settled, so let's
You'll see what we mean when you review the recording, but it's not a big enough problem to interfere with your beautiful teaching.
Yes, it is.
It depends. Yeah, it does block quite a few words, but
Are you going to try to reshare?
How are we doing?
still there. Trying to figure what could that be.
It'd be amazing, Gail, if it's not on the recording, but it's in the live presentation.
Looks like it's a layer on top of it. 'Cause
Yeah,
when he switched back out, that's all you've seen on the screen, and then his other presentation come behind it, like.
and it's very large letters too. That's the part. Yeah, I wonder if you can shift it to the left.
It's an
maybe.
overlay. Looks like an overlay, what they call an overlay.
I love Zoom.
I used to be a huge fan of this program. And so
Alex, isn't that something you can drag down?
Yeah.
no, because on my presentation screen it doesn't show up. It only shows up in your side. And so I'm not sure what it is that is causing the problem.
And that didn't happen before when you were testing. So this is, again, maybe two. You said you're running 3 systems, so maybe 2 are not.
No.
Alex, at the top, very, very top, you'll see the word meeting, and then you see KFSSI host EN screen. And when I click on the 3 dots, it's saying hide active speaker panel. I don't know if that's anything. Maybe you don't have that at the top of your screen.
Oh, I know what you're saying. Okay, just a moment.
Alex, I can very easily pause recording and then we can resume.
Sure. It is
okay, I'm going to pause. Done.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry for that interruption. As you see, we're still searching for outer space. We're just having trouble with our own little space here. And so the contention that we're talking about today is contending in the battle to find this plasma highway to our pie in the sky. And it's not something that we can do in the physicality, but we keep trying to do it in the physicality, don't we? And it's we're relentless in that pursuit. And so Mr. Kesh has written books. Number 1 is The Universal Order of the Creation of Matter. And we bringing together 3 energy fields, the matter, dark matter, and antimatter. And then, of course, where did they come from? And so in book number 2, the structure of the light. And so what that means is that there was a matter, and there was another matter, and somehow one came to the other. And then, of course, there's book number 3, which kind of goes right back to the whole thing, the origin of the universe. So now that we have that matter, it seems to break up into other 2 matter states. But are they matter states or are they plasma states? And what is the difference? So when we look at the coming together of the one planet, one nation, one for justice and world peace, we see that Rick Crammond and the members of the Universal Council are trying to, for 361 weeks in a row, bring peace to this planet. So peace is a concept, and it's not something that is that you can put your hands on it. You can put your hands on a piece of pie, but you know, when we're starting to talk about concepts, then we have to look at it from a different point of view. And so as we're governing our life, we follow these commandments. And we find that, ironically, we've had 10 commandments to follow. And of course, it's very important to understand that, you know, thou shalt not kill is a very important one, but there are another 14. So altogether, it's about 20. And what is the difference that we're talking about? So we're trying to get on the plasma highway, but there are other highways, and each of these highways has a energy strength. And so when we look at the combination of the energies that are contained in there, and if we itemize them in something that we can quantify, let's say, when we look at the plasma highway, we have carbon 16 and carbon 8. And if we add those up, we come up with carbon 24. And then, of course, there's a transmission highway. Now, it only has carbon 12, which tells you quite clearly that you're only seeing half the picture, because 12 and 12 is 24. And the 12 that you're seeing is part of the physical state. The 12 that you're not seeing is part of the plasmatic state. And so that transmission has to be present in both states. We know that because when we go to the transition highway, we have them both, the 14 and the carbon 10, and that's 24. It is from the transition state that we can decide which way we're going to go. And so to get to the transmutation highway, which is the highest energy state, we get our carbon 24. So we have our, shall we say, our common ground, but this ground is really elevated. And how far are we elevating this ground? Well, we have cornerstones in the universe that guide us. So you can pick your position and you can pick your corner. And as the wrestlers say, well, in the blue corner and then in the red corner, and then we find that the universe is rotating. So you have to ask yourself, which corner is the red corner? And if you're quick enough, maybe you can see where the red is. But if you're not quick enough, then it gets blurred. And so we don't see any corners. Everything is kind of round. So to understand the difference between the transmission, transition, and transmutation, we have to see the amalgamation of the carbon as a one-track ratio. So in the transmission, the 12 in the physicality and the 12 in the plasma state has a ratio 1:1. But in the transition state, you've got the carbon 14 to the carbon 10 is a 1.4:1. And then when you go to the transmission state, the transmutation, excuse me, it's ratio 2:1, carbon 16 to carbon 8. So you still have the carbon 24 as a balance, but the ratio has changed. And so when you change that ratio, you change the energy. And so we find that what we're talking about is the change in field strength. And so when we look at this field strength in its manifestation, in terms of its plasma orientation, we can have an inertia field. In terms of its physical orientation, we can have an inertia field. And so in order to have this inertia field, it has to come together from a contention of two other fields. And it is a contention. They are vying for position in that inertia field. And once they get into that inertia, then it either is the transmission state or the transition state. Or it's the transition state or the transmutation state. And so, well, wait a second. I have two transition dimensions. One that comes from the transmission and one that goes to the transmutation. And this becomes very important to understand, because when we look at the basic math and we see, okay, well, if we're just looking at the manifestation of one state where 1 and 1 is greater than 2, and we say that because it's not like you take everything that you have and you put it in the bag and now you have it in the bag. The two that are feeding dimensions remain. And now you have a product, which is the feedback dimension on the other side, which is literally the inertia field. And so that becomes your feedback dimension. So the cause of the feedback is the feeding. And you have to have a feedback, because when do you start the feeding? When do you stop the feeding? And who exactly are you feeding? So all this is the action of the feeding, but it doesn't tell you where it's going. And you are the observer. And so you have the opportunity to absorb this energy or not. And so you are in a different dimension. And that's what's important to understand, because the whole feeding process is a MAGRAV energy transfer state. And when we say MAGRAV energy, it's a balance between the magnetical gravitational fields. That's what it means, not the conventional MAGRAV, which we were assembling for energy, but what we're talking about is the conservation of energy. And we understand that we have an atomic state and a nanostate and a GaN state. Each state is an order of magnitude in energy higher, order being 10 times. And so we see the relationship on each state. And so we have a balance in the GaN state from the one side to the other side of the equation. But that is not the only criteria that you have to look at. You have to understand that you can go from state to state. In other words, you can go from the GaN state of one to the nanostate of the other. And it would balance out. Well, how is it possible if one energy state has 10 times the energy of the other energy state? That doesn't seem to be very balanced. But when we look at the junction of the plasma energy, we see that there is a transition matter. And in order to manifest that transition matter, we have to put it in a transfer state. That transfer state becomes an inertia field. Now, from that inertia field, we can transition to another transition matter state. So therefore, the plasma junction is where we have the inertia field that we create one track, and then we have the inertia field that creates another track. And so there have to be two inertia fields that are part of the transition, because they're feeding the three dimensions that we call transmission, transition, and transmutation. So 3 energy states, 2 transition states in between, and there has to be a balance. And this is how the universe is created, because it exists from energy. And so when we talk about plasma science, we have to understand that energy is always in motion. And so when we talk about the charge, we know that the energy is positive. but the charge is the direction of motion. It's a positive or negative motion. And all things are working in combination because they go from, and then they go to, and then they go back again. So it's a two-way street. And wherever we go, if we want to do a manifestation, it's a creation of matters, the bringing together of the matter, the dark matter, and the antimatter. So by the conservation of the Magrav energy states, we find that we can not only transition from one matter state to another matter state, but we can transition in between energy states. So this becomes very, very important. But what happens in the physical state is that the plasma rule, where the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, may become a point of conflict. And it becomes a point of contention. And so we have a choice to make it a point of contention, or we can make it a binding zone. And sometimes when we bind things, they don't get along. So in the plasma rule, things always get along. And the reason is because whatever is chosen to go into the binding zone is compatible to both of them. So there is no contention. So what we see sometimes as a point of confrontation with two forces coming together may be carrying contentious issues. But these issues can be resolved so that we don't have conflict. And to resolve them, then these can become a point of containment. So the inertia field, which is the point of containment, does not have to be a point of confrontation. However, we understand that this inertia point is a binding of energy for self-serving purposes. And too many of us are doing it at the expense of others. And you say, well, why are you doing it at the expense of others when you're getting it from the lowest energy state and you're denying that you're getting it from the higher energy state, and you don't even have to do anything? But when you steal from others, then the others have a diminished resource. And then they may choose to have a contentious issue with you. So that contentious issue can be resolved in many ways. So one of the ways we like to resolve contentious issues is through, say, sports. Another way is through war, and another way is through dialogue. But sometimes that dialogue is also at the expense of others. So when we come to this relationship junction, we see that the scientific community does not necessarily work together with the spiritual community because there are gaps in the knowledge. And so it's the responsibility of the plasma science to add to the knowledge. And since the science in the plasma state operates at orders of magnitude higher than in the physical state, then we can change the rate of change. And even that we can accelerate. So acceleration really changes the whole thing. And it may change the whole issue, the contentious issue of, I don't want to change. I like things to be the same. Well, do we? So we created the cups of life because they showed us that in the monatomic science process, we can create ganses. Each of us was able to do this. So we created emotional strength and physical strength in our cups of life. But we also learned that we could produce other ganses. And so each of these ganses becomes part of a radiance manifestation. That manifestation is an inertia field, but it's of a higher energy state. So the inertia fields are not simply the bringing down of energy, the taking of two higher energies and bringing them down, where the higher energy feeds the lower energy, but they can be the amalgamation of lower fields and bringing it to the higher field. It's a two-way street. So the inertia fields are a two-way street. But when we're talking about Gans manifestation, we're talking about the radiance. And the radiance means it's magnetical. When we bring it down to a lower energy state, it means it's gravitational. So we are in that lower energy state, and we don't really acknowledge that we get fed by the sun. We know the plants get fed by the sun, so we harvest the plants to feed us. That's pretty good. So if the plants are depending on that energy coming from the sun, don't you think we are getting our energy from the sun? So, when we're talking about this feeding, and we say, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me, and that's all it is about me. And me at the expense of others. And this is where we're off track. We don't understand that our existence is a combination of the emotional field and the physical field. And so when we had the two cups, we could create the cup of man. But that was one cup that was created from two cups. So the cup of man is a cup of inertia. And then if we add the cup of soul, we have now increased the field strength of the cup of inertia to include the cup of the soul, the cup of the emotion, the cup of the physicality. And we manifest our physicality. But you know what? We have the cup of the universe. And the cup of the universe is in our brain. And that is a field that is able to manifest these various ganses. And these ganses allow us to manifest in the physicality. So the physicality becomes a product of the inertia of the mind. But the inertia of the mind is not just the left and right hemisphere, but it also involves the soul of the man. But the soul of the man cannot manifest if it doesn't have a place to manifest to. So it has to combine with the soul of the earth. Now, when you have a place to manifest, we have the soul of the physicality, which is another inertia field, another inertia manifestation. And at that point, we can manifest into the physicality. But wait a second, we still need to manifest somewhere in the physicality. Okay, because the soul of the man, the soul of the physicality can formalize an inertia manifestation in the soul of the earth. But we can't manifest into the physicality until the soul of the earth, with the soul of the physicality of the earth, manifested into the physicality of the earth. And so we have to have this crossover and this compatibility. And then we find, well, the earth has already done this. And so it has its own grand central station where it brings in all the ganses. And all these ganses have different attributes, and they have different densities, and they are unique, and they are visible, and they are specific. And in order, if you want to be specific, then you need to isolate. So that isolation we call prejudice. So the Earth space range details, such as carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen, are all specific details, and they all become part of the prejudicial process of isolating them on the periodic table of elements. So we are not elementary. We are a combination of a whole raft of these elements. And why not? The Earth is the same way. So when we're bringing this principal matter, these PM ticks, which are magnetical, and arriving on the Earth, which is gravitational, we are combining these forces into a force field, and we have to dilute them. We have to bring them all together, the antimatter, dark matter, and the matter gen, and converge them into an inertia field, which we call a magrav. But that magrav is in the plasma state, and it needs to go somewhere. And so, as we said, it has to interact with the magrav of the Earth. Now you have another inertia field that comes together, and now you have your physicality. So that means in the matter plasma dimensions, there's a physical dimension where you can touch it and feel it, and there's a plasmatic dimension. I'm sorry, you can't touch it and you can't see it, but they work together, where one is the feeding and one is the feedback. So when we're looking at the feedback, that means we have the gravitational conformation. And one of the most important things that we need in the beginning was the hydrogen. And so it manifests a color, which was its unique fingerprint. And it came together from the magnetical field of the sun interacting with the magnetical field of the Earth, interacting with the magnetical field of the universe, coming together, and on a one track being very specific, making a gravitational destination, a gravitational conformation, that's hydrogen. And what's really interesting is that you can get that conformation anywhere in the universe, because that is a very unique fingerprint. And then we also have another unique fingerprint, and that is oxygen. And it has confirmed itself gravitationally the same way. And it has similarly a fingerprint, but different from hydrogen. So we have an oxygen fingerprint. And when these two come together, well, they create water. And this is the fundamental thing about the Earth. It's loaded with water. So when we look at the manifestation of a plasma star, we see that we could have created rotating fields, and in here we have 4 rotating fields, 3 on the bottom and 1 at the top, and each of them has a dynamic plasma field, but collectively they work together and they create one plasma field. And that plasma field is non-tangible. That means you can't touch it, you can't see it. But what you can see is the inertia field that comes as a result of this energy transfer. So this energy transfer has to transition from these rotating fields that make up the plasma star and transition to the center point, which is the manifestation of the energy derived from the plasma star. And so we have our 3 fields. We have our physical field. We have our plasma field around each physical field. And then we have the combination of the dynamic plasma field coming together from the plasma fields created by the others. So there is something that's linking everything together. So in the physical state, we understand how the atomic state works, and we find that all of these things link together. But when we introduce the monatomic state, they still link together, but they're not chained. And that is a significant difference. So they maintain a stability without the chaining process. So why are we so dominated by chaining ourselves down? And so we look at the structure of life and we see that everything comes together and kind of like a chain or a fence or a line of soldiers, or for our cellular structure, a line of phospholipids, where we have the hydrophilic heads and the hydrophobic tails. And so the tails, of course, because of the surface to volume ratio, are magnetical. But since they come together, they create this transition zone. And there's an outside and there's an inside. Well, if the transition zone is magnetical, that means the other side of the zone is gravitational. And so here we have an interesting thing. The outside is gravitational and the inside is gravitational. Oh, really? Well, why is that important? Well, when you put all the phospholipids together, they create the cell boundary. But now we have a relationship that's kind of strange. So all of the phospholipids are pointing in to the center, and the center is gravitational. Why is that? When you have all the phospholipids crunched together in the center, and if you look at that dome, that circle where you bring everything together, it's a smaller circle. So the smaller circle on the inside is more dense than the larger circle on the outside. The circles we're talking about is connecting the blue dots. It's the same number, but there's a density change. And therefore there's a ratio change, the number of dots per area. So in the core is gravitational and the outside is magnetical. Well, that accounts for the flow of energy in one direction. But it doesn't seem to account for the flow of energy in the other direction. Unless we look at this plasma chain and understand that we have this energy in the core, which emits out of the North Pole and comes back into the South Pole. And so now if we can take that image and apply it to this plasma chain of the cell boundary, maybe now we can see how it works. And then we understand that there's another force which is bringing the kind of nutrients that that particular cell needs, because I think we all agree that the cells in the kidneys are different from the cells in the pancreas. But they all function the same way. In other words, the same way of exchanging energy. And so this is the thing about the plasma space technology. It allows you to work with the fields of the universe. And so although this looks like a fancy tanning salon, it's for your pleasure to go inside and experience the energy transfer. Now, wait a second. Isn't that what you do in a tanning salon? You go inside and you draw the energy that is coming from the lights and you tan. And if you go outside and you draw the energy from the light called sun and you tan, gee, there's a similarity. So if you go into the enhancement unit and work with those plasma energies, You don't tan, but you heal because you're drawing in the energy at a higher order of magnitude. So when we look at in the beginning, this is how it happened. So we brought these fields together. There was the neutron, and it drew energy in and more energy in and more energy in until that energy had a tension problem on the surface tension. So the negative energy of the neutron became positive because it had more and more energy, and the surface tension was being reduced. And then it had to release. And it released the electron and the proton. But at the same time, there was a price to pay, and that was the PM tick. So if you were to add up the energy of the PM tick, the electron, and the proton, that would equal the neutron, and that accounts for the discrepancy when we look at the mass between the neutron and the electron-proton combination. However, there's energy that is coming from many other sources, and those also have to be taken into account. So how much do we take into account, and do we have the skill set to do that? Well, since we're engaging with all the elements on the periodic table of elements on this planet, and we bring them in, and then we find that each and every one of us is unique. And each and every one of us has a slightly different color. But there's basically 7 kind of races on this planet. And yet we're all part of this planet. So really, it doesn't matter what color we are. We're all part of the same race. And this is a different kind of race, right? Because the races may be genetically distinct populations. So these are all individuals within the same species. But we can define races differently, geographically, physiologically. And there's a genetic isolation between races that is not complete. And these differences may accumulate, but not sufficient to separate the species. Not like we separate cats and dogs. We're part of the Homo sapiens. 8 billion, of human beings living today all belong to one species. As in all species, there's a variation among individual human beings, and that is the flavor. It's a unique flavor. And so we have different sizes, different shapes, different skin tone, eye color, but we are much more alike than we are different. In fact, we are remarkably similar. So this is a point of contention, because when we look at our humanities civilization, we like to categorize things. Let's say, oh, you're Asian, or you're Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, or you're Black or African American, and or you're white, are you? And then Hispanic or Latino, or Middle Eastern or North African. And then, of course, you could be an American Indian or an Alaska Native. So we like to categorize this, but you know, we like to look at the color and forgetting that inside we're all the same. And so this aspect of our understanding of the humanity civilization is to basically focus our attention on who we are on this planet, as opposed to what this planet is all about. So we're more focused on ourselves than we are on this planet. But we needed to be focused on the planet because we wouldn't be here without it. We wouldn't be here without other things as well. But without a planet to go to, we're not there. And so if we're going to go somewhere, there has to be there first. So we're focused on ourselves for some reason, and we find that we are all part of this whole universe. But this focus, this point of contention, becomes a point of tension. And what happens with the tension is that it creates a binding zone. So the binding zone is really the difference between what you see on the perimeter, which is a nice pathway, a nice round pathway with no obstructions, to having this convoluted pathway in the core. And so clearly, it requires more work to go down this pathway. Maybe it's a lot more fun, a lot of curves, maybe a lot of ups and downs and things like that. But it takes longer to go. It requires more energy. And, you know, maybe initially it's fun. Maybe. Or maybe it becomes worse. And maybe it creates a binding field. It's just a pathway through the field, but the whole field itself becomes a binding zone. And that kind of creates a hurt. And that hurt transcends the entire field. And then, you know, you wonder, how did that happen? How did we go off the track? Because when we look at the amino acid affinity, we're bringing together the nitrogen, hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. And we find that we create a single track of amino acid as a single chain. And when we fold that over, we create a protein as a double chain. So where's the binding? And there's a sequence to make this protein, and the byproduct is water. Well, this is very handy because protein and water don't mix. So our cells are made of protein, and we have water on the outside, water on the inside, and if they did mix, we'd just be bags of mush. So when we look at the planet, we see how it's constructed, and we have two facets of the planet. One is aerobic, which means oxygen is present. And when we look at the ganses, we see the CO2 GANS, the zinc GANS, and the copper GANS. These are all molecules that involve oxygen. But there's an anaerobic GANS, which means oxygen is absent. And that would be our iron GANS, or CH3, which is literally sugar. So when we look at our DNA, we have to understand that the DNA is a physical explanation for plasmatic precedence. This pattern that you see is a manifestation of a plasmatic idea, a plasmatic concept. And as it comes together, we see the amalgamation of the RNA and the DNA. That's not a point of contention, it's a point of containment. And so the basic DNA is really carbon in a sugar phosphate backbone. And we have hydrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus. So this backbone is made with a star formation, with the phosphorus, and 4 oxygens in the star formation. And sometimes it's rigid, sometimes it's flexible, and sometimes you look at a jellyfish and you wonder, does it have a backbone? But it has protein and it has water, and somehow the two don't mix. And in fact, it lives in water. Wow, what a strange creature. Anyway, when we're talking about food, the most important component of that food is actually the glucose. The glucose is the energy we get from the food. That's the whole purpose of eating. Well, you know, maybe it's nice to socialize and go out for dinner and have a nice meal. But let's face it, the main reason for eating food is to gain energy. So that energy conversion has to happen inside the body from the outside of the body. And that conversion is called phosphorylation, where the glucose is phosphorylated into fructose. And so what that means at these points, at these junction points, these corners, where you have a high surface to volume ratio, literally the glucose flips into fructose. That's a very basic concept of phosphorylation. So you still maintain the structure, but not the same energy strength. So that energy, which we call phosphorylation, literally comes from the inertia field that is created in the mind and crosses over into the inertia field of the body, governed by the heart of all things. And we know that because our heart is beating. And when we get excited, it beats even faster. And we can get excited for a lot of reasons. Some of those reasons are pleasurable, and some of those reasons are points of contention. And so we see that there's a blood-brain barrier where the blood goes through our body, but it goes around our brain, and there's a point of crossover, and that point is not visible. In fact, there's a lot of things that are not visible. But one thing that is visible is that we have 3 different energy fields in the cytochrome, A, B, and C. And these are part of the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is a sequencing of energy transfer within the body. And the whole purpose, we eat to get energy, really. Well, that energy is manifested into group, excuse me, it's manifested in glucose and phosphorylates into fructose, which facilitates the production of adenosine triphosphate. And this is the currency of life. Unlike what we think currency of life is money, right? But in biology, 36 ATP are produced from 1 glucose molecule. Wouldn't it be nice to take that to the bank? So what we're looking at is a star formation where the 3 phosphates come together and manifest into an ATP. And so there's an energy transfer. And that's what we're talking about, energy transfer. That is done on a plasmatic basis. But let's explain it on a physical basis. We have 3 energy states, A, B, and C, and each of them produce 12 ATP. And so in a healthy cell condition to get this deal, 36 ATP to 1 glucose, you have to have, shall we say, all cylinders firing at the same time. But if they're not, we find a deficiency. And that deficiency is in the transition zone, the cytochrome B. And so we find that an unhealthy cell is producing only 26 ATP. Well, we are not completing the phosphorylation cycle. So we have to consume more energy. What does that mean? That means we have to consume more food. Or maybe we can consume food that has more energy, or we can phosphorylate the energy better. So all of this has to do with energy sequencing. So how does that apply to our physicality and our relationship to the plasma reality? So if you look at starting at the bottom, we have a magnetic field, we have electrical, then we have electromagnetic, then atomic, then nuclear, then plasma. And we have the soul of the body and the soul of the man. And each of these levels carries a higher energy state as we elevate, if you will, to the top. Now, what's interesting, and I say interesting because all of these are non-visible, and yet they're distinctive. How can you be distinctive and not be visible? So the problem with this ATP boils down to its aerobic content. So in a healthy environment, the cytochrome environment is considered aerobic, but in an unhealthy, it's considered anaerobic. Right? So one of the most important byproducts of amino acids is the production of alpha-linolenic acid. This is a polyunsaturated fatty acid, but it's slightly alkaline. And so we see the consumption of hydrogen. And if we understand balance, one side balances the other side, clearly, if we have gaps on one side, that is going to be a point of contention. And that's going to cause bending. But in that point of contention and that point of bending, it causes another energy transaction. And so across that bending, there has to be a balance. And when we bring that energy inside, because of the bending, we have a convergence, and that convergence means it's more dense. Whereas in the outside, it becomes less dense. So in plasma science, the more dense is gravitational, the less dense is magnetical. But furthermore, if we look at the endpoints, we find that the carboxyl delta end, which is water soluble, has 2 oxygens and 1 hydrogen. And when you look at the methyl, the omega end, which is oil soluble, 1 hydrogen. So now we realize that the methyl side is magnetical and the carboxyl side is gravitational. Well, isn't that interesting? And that side is the water side. So we are literally producing 3 water molecules there, because if one side is alkaline, the other side is acidic. That means one side is the hydrogen, the other side is the oxygen. We are talking about a healthy state. Look at all the factories in that chain. And look at what's in that chain. We have carbon, we have hydrogen, we have oxygen, and where is the nitrogen? We're missing the nitrogen. Where, oh, where did the nitrogen go? And so we have this amino star with 3 hydrogens and 1 triple oxygen. Isn't that interesting? So when we look at our humanity civilization and we see, well, we're all kind of divided, but we all on this planet as one civilization. And we have all these points of contention. And we have this problem on this planet. And we say, well, it's a convergence of all these points of containment. But this planet, is made up of all of our civilizations. So what that means is each civilization has its own point of contention. Well, that's not unique. Others have a contention within themselves. But now, there could be a contention from one to the other. Such as, oh, you're black, oh, you're white. Oh, yes? Well, that's a point of racism, isn't it? Well, where does that come from when we're all the same on the inside? Well, the thing is, that point of contention is not unique to us. All the races have that contention. And when all the races have that point of contention, then the planet is getting the flack. And so we now have a strong gravitational contention that comes from the contention of all the individuals. The contentions that we have in this humanity civilization is amalgamation of all on this planet. You can't just say, oh, well, it's that country, or it's that nationality, or it's that race. We all have it. So where's the blame game? And what is the result of that blame game? Well, guess what? It affects our health. So where we are creating this oxygen within our fatty acids, we start to create this binding. And this binding is magnetical. And so it eventually depletes the oxygen. And it disables the functionality. So that's your concept. But let's look at what are they saying about this concept. So we started with glucose, which is a sugar. And look at its formula. C6H12O6. Where is the nitrogen? So this glucose is the most abundant monosaccharide, which is a subcategory of carbohydrates, and mainly made by plants. And most algae during photosynthesis for water and carbon dioxide, using the energy from, the sun. The plants are using the energy from the sun. Okay, so we have to harvest the plants to get the energy from the sun. Is that the deal? Right? So we're missing something here, because if the energy coming from the sun is making the amino acids, we don't have the nitrogen here. Let's look at this Krebs cycle again. So they call it the citric acid cycle, right? Because it's used by organisms to respire. Respiration is opposed to fermentation. And the purpose of respiration is to generate energy. And truthfully, we can generate energy either anaerobically or aerobically. So there's a series of reactions that takes in acetyl-CoA and produces carbon dioxide, but also it produces NADH, FADH2, and the ATP, which we already know what that is, or GTP. And so you have a tricarboxylic acid, carboxylic acid, which we know is very acidic and is a central metabolic hub for the interacting pathways of respiration. And it does nitrogen assimilation and photorespiration. Wait a second, isn't that what the plants are doing? And now we know where the nitrogen is gone because it's been assimilated. And so this is done with components that show considerable flexibility in relation to adaptations to the different functions of mitochondria in photosynthetic or non-photosynthetic cells. Okay, so now we're better understanding how we're doing this, but we've introduced some really funny words here, such as NADH, and look at that formula. Now, I don't want you to break down this formula anymore. They're just knowing the names of the components. So we have carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus. Well, we know this is good because we know the phosphorus is part of the DNA chain. So the amino acids in the DNA are intimately intertwined. And we have Mr. Cohen there, the carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. But that's the one thing that we want to notice. But the other thing we want to notice is that the carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen are odd or asymmetric. And the oxygen and phosphorus is symmetric or even. So inside the mitochondria, one molecule of NADH is equivalent to 3 ATP. There's that 1:3 ratio again. And NADH is generated in the cytoplasm during glycolysis and must be transported across the mitochondrial membrane. Membranes don't have a mouth, right? So you can't just shove it through the membrane. It has to cross the membrane, and it has to do this as an energy transfer. So what we're transferring is the electrons to the electron transport chain, and this requires energy. Well, isn't that what we're talking about? We're talking about energy. Maybe you're still thinking food, but we need to process the food to generate the energy. So the NADH plus is the oxidized form. That is, it's a state in which the losses, in which it loses an electron. NADH is a reduced form of the molecule, which means that it gains the electron loss by the NAD plus. So we have a redox reaction involving electron transfers, and they play a central role in energy creation. This is what we're talking about, energy creation. So whether you understand what's going on here or not, understand that it's energy creation. And so this nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, NADH plus, it's NAD plus hydrogen. There's the H. It occurs naturally in the body and plays a role in generating energy. It's an energy generator. And the NADH produced by the body is involved in making energy in the body. The oxidation of one molecule of NADH leads to the synthesis of 3 molecules of ATP. There's that 1:3. But the oxidation of FADH2, which enters the electron transport chain at complex 2, yields only 2 ATP molecules. Complex 2 is cytochrome B. So complex 1 is a synthesis of 3 molecules, and complex 2 only gets 2. We're getting shortchanged here. So what's FADH? Flavin adenine dinucleotide. And it's a redox cofactor. And it's created during the Krebs cycle. So as part of the whole process, this is in the Krebs cycle, but it's utilized during the last part of respiration in the electron transport chain. So the NADH is a similar compound, but it's used more actively. So there's a sequence. So the oxidation of 1 molecule of NADH gives rise to 3 molecules of ATP, and the 1 molecule of FADH produces only 2. Why is there a difference? So the number of molecules that are synthesized depends on the nature of the electron donor. So if you're getting the energy source from the right donor, then you produce 3 molecules. But if you're getting shortchanged, then you're only getting 2. So that has to play a factor. Now, let's just look at the component at the top there. You have your carbon, hydrogen, phosphorus. There's the nitrogen. And there's your oxygen. What has changed here is that the phosphorus is even, is symmetric. All the others, Mr. Cohen, is odd, asymmetric. They're all missing something. What is oxidative phosphorylation? So this is the fundamental distinction between NADH and FADH. So during this phosphorylation process, we talked about where the NADH makes 3 ATP and the FADH makes 2. But the NADH distributes electrons to the cytochrome complex 1, whereas FADH does so to cytochrome complex 2. A specific pathway. Cytochrome A for the NADH, cytochrome B for the FADH. And during this time, electrons derived from one or the other combine with oxygen. And the energy released from these oxidative reduction reactions is used to drive, the word is drive, the synthesis of ATP from ADP. ATP is triphosphate, ADP is diphosphate. There's the 3 to the 2. So oxidative phosphorylation provides most of the ATP that higher animals and plants use to support life. I wonder if that includes Homo sapiens. And is responsible for setting and maintaining metabolic homeostasis. Balance. It's imperative for balance. So if we're in the aerobic cycle, the oxidative cycle, and functioning properly, we are happy on this planet. But if we are not, then we have to work harder to survive on this planet. And everything that we've talked about here is in the physics of biology, if you will. But when we talk about the conservation of susceptibility, we're talking about independent plasmatic variables and the relationship of the magnetical gravitational fields. And we are not saying at which energy state we're talking about. So clearly, if we have a cytochrome A, B, and C, and we have 3 different energy states and 3 different pathways, and there's a sequence, so that means there has to be a susceptibility, and that susceptibility is triggered by that environment. What are the consequences of this? Well, if we look at the potentiation of hydrogen, that is the pH scale, and we look at the alkalinity, which is slightly alkaline, we have a conformity of the DNA. And when it becomes a little bit more acidic, but still alkaline, such as 7.46, which is slightly above the medium, it's healthy. And that DNA takes a different conformity. And then when it becomes acidic, it stretches. And just like our fatty acids, which is slightly alkaline, the acidic environment of the human body is slightly alkaline as well. But it's dropped down from 7.46 to around 7.3 and a bit. Doesn't sound like much, but when you're dealing in orders of magnitude, it's a lot. The thing is that the tensity changes. It diminishes. It becomes more magnetic. The rotating fields, the spiral of the DNA is spread out. The functioning of the DNA is dependent on the communication. And if we change the nearness and proximity of that communication, we will change the functionality of the interpretation of the energy that we get from the DNA. So we haven't changed the DNA, we've just changed the interpretation of the information that we're getting from the DNA. And we're doing that to compensate for our environment. And so if our environment, which we call in the body the terrain, becomes more acidic, then we have to work harder because we are short in ATP production. Someone shortchanged us. And so where we have the giving and the taking, well, there's a lot more taking going on. And it's a lot easier to take the hydrogen than it is to take the oxygen. So it takes more work to produce the oxygen because it's gravitational. But then, because of the energy that is embedded in the oxygen, is feeding all 70 trillion cells in the body. And it's a lot easier for our body to do that than for us to do that. We don't have to think about it. This is done automatically by our body. How does it do that? It depends on the service that is coming from the plasmatic energy fields. So if we want to look at how NADH and FADH are produced and how ATP is the source, we have to understand there's a difference in the transmutation ratio quadrants. There are higher energy states, there are lower energy states, there are transition energy states. Also, there's a range from the acidic to the alkaline and all points in between. And there's a transition between all points in between. So a transition vertically, a transition horizontally. And the amalgamation of these two interactions is the inertia field of the manifestation of the physicality. So when we are discussing our physicality and we say, oh, you know, are we aerobic or are we anaerobic? That is the inertia field that is a product of the systems the way they're intended to work. But there are other factors that have to come into play, and we have to recognize what those other factors are. So, is it all from the food that we eat? When you consider the fact that all the energy that we get is only 20% from the food that we eat, and 80% from the same energy source, which the plants get. The plants get all the energy from the sun. So, you know, why are we any different? Because the metabolism for the plants and the metabolism for the humans is very, very simple and similar. It has to deal with energy transfer, ATP production, and the mitochondria, which are the blast furnaces that are producing that energy. So, what is causing the difference to make us go into a more acidic state, a more anaerobic state? That's the question. What is driving it? Something was driving it. Well, when we hold things in abeyance, if someone holds something in abeyance, they stop it from happening or being used at present. We call these people showstoppers. They're stoppers. Energy is always in motion. So, when we're seeking contentment, we can do it two ways. We can be contenders and seek winning or losing, or we can be contented and being satisfied. So we can achieve contentment both ways, and the show must go on. But there's a better way, and there's a lesser way, and this determines our survival. So there are predators, and they have a range. And as far as the universe is concerned, the range of travel for the survivors has to be beyond the range of travel of the predator. So in outer space, there is no war. There may be contention, but there is no war because survivors seek refuge, and they do not want to engage with the warmongers. And if we are forced to engage with the warmongers, then you look at how the plants are surviving and how the animals are surviving. And all you have to do is how they have adapted is with the number of offspring. So a dog may have a litter of 7 to 9 puppies, but an elephant would only have one baby. The chances of survival of one elephant is higher than the chances of survival of puppies. And so when you look at insects and they have millions of offspring, and fish have millions. Koi, for instance, 250,000 eggs in one batch. So everyone has a method to survive on this planet, and it is a harsh planet, as they say. But this is an oxygen planet. And when we're living in harmony with the planet, our environment is very aerobic. And in that process, all the breakdown and all the creation, plasmatically and physically, are in harmony. And the only way that harmony can be achieved is through peace, because we find that when we get into a form of contention, that creates a binding. And that binding can be created emotionally. It isn't just from the toxicity on this planet. Toxicity is a broad word that includes the physical toxicity, but there's also mental toxicity, which comes from abuse. So whether it's toxicity in the physical realm, which is abuse of this planet, or it's abuse of people, or there's a mental toxicity, which is an emotional abuse, it's still the same thing. It creates poor health. So how did we arrive healthy? Because the DNA has the blueprint. The DNA is the inertia field of the Earth-space transmutation state. We knew to come here. We didn't go to Mars. We didn't go to Mercury, or we didn't go to Jupiter. Not in our present state. So our physicality and our arrival in physicality is an inertia field from the Earth-space transmutation state. We knew that coming here. And so how do we know that? Because our manifestation comes from an inertia field. And that inertia field comes through the outer space, and it is in that healthy environment. Because that's how our souls operate. Our souls are the product of the Creator. And the Creator never creates anything bad. It's just how we interpret it. And if we want to apply that to this earth, we can say, well, everything on this earth is a wonder. But what's really a wonder is, why would we choose aerobic versus anaerobic when this is an oxygen planet? And that's why we gravitated here. And so when we live in a depleted planet, we become unhealthy. So can we change things in how we operate? Well, of course, because when we're talking about sequencing, we've seen in the plasma state that we can go from an atomic to a monatomic to a polyatomic to a field state of the plasma state. But let's rest assured that we can go one step beyond. But that takes us only into the one direction. Well, we can go one step beyond the other direction, and we have to do it both. Why? Because one step is magnetical, one step is gravitational, and without the combination of the two, you ain't going anywhere. And so we are in the beyond Sanya era, where we can mine the gold or we can produce the gold. It all depends on the sequence. And so when we look at the sequence of how we look at ourselves, we can look at ourselves superficially and say, oh, and we say beauty is skin deep. But if we look inside and we find that there's beauty everywhere, and if we want to look inside, shall we say, physically, we could do it with x-rays. That was a novel approach. And then we could do it with ultrasound. Same principle, different medium. And now we are beyond ultrasound, and we can do it with the plasma generation. That allows us not only to see the connection, but to see the structure of the soul of man and to see the interaction of the souls of man with the physicality. So to see all the points of the manifestation. And as we see the picture of the X-ray, and as we see the picture of the ultrasound, rest assured that the plasma manifestation picture will also be perfected. And this is one of the reasons when we go into outer space, there's no poker playing outer space, because they don't look at what you say. There's no bluffing. They see your soul and they see your true intention. And so they see your transmutation transition. And there are many points on the perspective scale. They can see how balanced you are and what your true intention is. And so we can see, despite all the chaos on this planet, we see a beautiful blue planet. And yet when we look closer and look at the transmutation between the micro and the macro, and we can see the detail, these are all just sequence providers. And they all contribute to peace. The planet does it, we do it. All of us do it. But we all do it with different efficiency. So, can we change? We have to change if we're going to progress. We have no choice. The reason we have no choice is because we made that choice before we came here. Without that choice, we wouldn't be here. So what we have to understand is that we can delve into the Krebs cycle and how the energy transfer is phosphorylated and all that, but we need to understand how the plasma is transferred, because the plasma is carrying the energy which causes all of these other manifestations. So if we look at the manifestations of the fields and we understand that these are all the functions to manifest the basic inertia fields, then we understand that when we're looking at our physical state and our dominant matter state, that we are looking at the wrong side of the telescope. We are looking at the smallest image. Get on the other side, look the other way, and see the larger picture. So we understand that transmutation has to do with the range transition, which transcends the inertia field of the transmutation dimensions. There are many transmutation dimensions, and they all follow the laws of conservation, because they govern the covalent, the trivalent, the tetravalent bonding attributes. And so the containment of inertia is manifest through the contention of equality. The manifestation of the intent of the inertia field is a contention for resources. But these resources are the common denominator between two fields to come together to manifest one inertia field. So the contention is to facilitate the equality, not to facilitate the separation. The inertia field cannot be created without equality. There has to be a binding factor. There has to be a common denominator. The contentiousness of selection of this binding factor is not a violent selection. It is not a contentious issue based on race, religion, war, or attributes. It's based on affinity. What are you trying to achieve, and how are you trying to achieve it, and who's making that decision? And so we find that the soul of man cannot be abandoned, and it cannot be compromised either. So the color of man is really based on the integration with the soul of the man. This is the integrity of man, the contention of equality. It's a tension. It's a tension force. And it creates a nonlinear unity, which is determining the path link of susceptibility. So it involves the emission of attention, and it involves the emission of retention. And it interacts to create the emission of intention. The intention is a representation of the truth, and this creates a balance of contention, the contention of equality. And so we need to set up an antenna so that we have a message that's feeding and a feedback manifestation. So we have to tune in to this transmission, and we can transition the tuning where we select one force, which is magnetical, and balance it by the force selection of another, which is gravitational. And so now you have the resulting selection, which is feeds the MAGRAV manifestation, right? And this selection manifestation is predetermined by changing the peace dome of intention. And some people talk about it, and some people do something about it. So the emission of intention is what affects the standard folding deviation and leaves no room for war. So the transmutation manifests in balance with the peace dome. And that's what we'll be trying to teach for 573 weeks in a row through the Knowledge Seekers workshops, to bring this greater oneness together, which transcends the limitations of the nuclear science the way we understand it, because we're all radioactive. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers learning about the new selection process, the new selection process of the new plasma science. There's a World Peace Treaty. We need to sign it. We need to sign it with intensity, with true meaning, with our soul, with the proper belief and the proper intention. Is man the reactor of a three-dimensional transcendent inertia? You betcha, but there are no straight lines through this field transmutation. But we have to get there safely. And we have to go into outer space with a peace dome. The inertia of the present is governed by the dimensions of history. But it's our viewpoint. We can change history. We don't need to carry the baggage. How do we impart the transition of energy states of inertia? So the tension of contention is only amplified in the physical transmission dimensions, and the plasma science needs to be delivered daily via the peace dome in exchange for peace on earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. Thank you very much for allowing me to present. Over to you, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Let's see if any of the participants, you've raised any questions or they'd like to make a comment. Anyone?
Hello, Alex. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Claudia.
This subject, thank you, Alex, for your teaching, was wonderful. And I was thinking about this DNA this week, and sometimes I think that we only get the presentation if we change our DNA. And I was thinking, how can you change the DNA if the DNA is like multiples star formations, and you need time and space to change? And which kind of metabolic, which kind of amino acid could be changed? Like if we don't need more nitrogen, I can't speak this. And which kind, the phosphor is similar. The enxofre, I don't know in English, the same, enxofre, is similar to enxofre. Speak again, please.
Were you talking about sulfur or something
sulfur
else?
Yes, sulfur, yes, sulfur in English, yes. Enxofre is in Portuguese. Sulfur and phosphor is like similar to our nitrogen. So I don't know how could be changed and with the sessions. And for example, okay, we move it to another amino acid and we transmute it. How can you like come back or remember that you were using nitrogen, I think so big for my understanding and my knowledge until now. I want to know what you think about it.
Well, first of all, you're the architect of your existence. And if I give you the blueprints for you, do you think the blueprint for the kidney would be the same as the blueprint for the liver?
I'll just say no.
Oh, thank you. So if they were the same, then they wouldn't be different. I mean, that's kind of a obvious statement, or maybe it's a dumb statement, but the point is there's a selection process. So it's like a menu at a restaurant. You have to choose what you want. And in some restaurants, they dictate what you're going to want. We will produce a hamburger and you like it. Okay. But other restaurants, they have everything, every type of meal, from soup to pasta, soup to nuts, or whatever. And so you can make the selection. Well, the DNA is doing the same thing. And that DNA is the amalgamation of all the experiences that you've had in your existence. And so when you choose to come to the earth, that's the part of the menu that you're selecting. But if you're going to go someplace else and that has a different menu, so, you can't be selecting the same things by going to a different place. So otherwise, what is the difference between, Chinese food and American food? Then there would be no difference, but there is. And the foods that you have on the Chinese menu are different from the foods that you have on the American menu. And yet they're all part of the foods and they're all part of this earth. So you have an opportunity to make that selection. So what I'm saying is that if you try to decide what to select, you don't select the sulfur, or you don't select the nitrogen or the gold. You have to select the intention of it, because the nitrogen, the sulfur, the gold, the copper are all individual inertia fields that come together from a plasmatic intention. And so if you buy into that intention, then you can create whatever you want. And you say, well, so when you're looking at energy, which is all encompassing, then every single manifestation, every single inertia field on the periodic table is a manifestation of energy in motion. So why are they different?
And
Because,
how can I choose if I don't know then?
well,
It's a perfect example, but I don't know how to choose.
well, you have to trust in your choice because your choice is doing a beautiful job. All you have to do is look in the mirror to see how beautiful. And that is not, you don't wake up in the morning, looking like well, not looking pretty. And then you, all of a sudden you say, well, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. It's time for me to look pretty. And then you change. That's not the way it's done. You are who you are, and you look the way you look. But the thing is, the appearance is only skin deep. So the first rule is, what is the affinity that you have to the planet? So you have to abide by all of these periodic table of elements. And then when you look around and you see how many different people are, how many different varieties we have, and the people that are living on this planet are not representative of all the choices, because there were many, many generations prior to this. So we maybe have, let's say, 8 billion people on this planet, and we're going to have another 8 billion people on this planet. And in our history, we had 8 billion. So all of a sudden, just within that near range, the near past, the near future, and our present, 24 billion people, that's 24 different choices. And how do they choose? Well, the choice is already made because it's ingrained within the DNA. And then you get to choose what you want to bring out. And it's very interesting to see how people can change their conformity based on their intention. So if someone is worried, then that becomes a prayer for what they don't want. And what does that mean? That means you need to stop worrying. It's like, oh, I can't get to sleep. Well, the moment you worry about not getting to sleep, you can't get to sleep. That will be a fulfillment of that prophecy. You have given an intention that you can't sleep. But if you say, I know that sleep is a natural phenomenon, you've done it every night. You do it at least 365 times a year. Maybe some people get shortchanged in their sleep, but some people sleep also during the daytime, so that would be double that. Over 700 times you fall asleep. So at some point in time, you have to have the trust and say, okay, I'm not the one that has to make the decision. When I'm tired, I go to sleep, and when I wake up, I'm going to be refreshed. And if you have that kind of attitude, then you're programming yourself to make that selection. So that selection becomes a representation of your emotion. And this is the part that we're missing. But if we don't understand that there's a duality to our purpose, then we won't understand that there are two emotions. So when you say, well, look at that person, how elegant they are. They have such great taste. And then you go to someone else and they are eating the worst food possible. So you could say, well, the taste is in their mouth. And that's the difference. One is the taste that is physical, and one is the taste that is emotional. So in our physicality, we can get away with being deceptive. But in our plasma reality, we can't. Because you end up being the product of what you envisioned. The point being is that if you are a warmonger, you will live and die the same way. You cannot extricate yourself from that environment. So choose the environment. And how can you do that? Well, you have to live the way you want to be lived. If you want peace, you have to live in peace. You can't fight for peace. Okay, you can't manufacture guns to, enforce peace. That doesn't work. And then if you understand that there's an impetus, there's an energy flow that's coming from you, and that is adding to that field. That means you are now committed. You are now part of the whole process. You are consumed. Well, wait a second. I don't mind, you dying, but, I don't want to have to suffer. Why should I suffer because you're dead? Well, because you're the one who's causing that suffering. And you cannot do that as per the laws of conservation of energy without paying for it. And so when something has happened to you 20 years ago, and it's a bad thing, and it becomes, say, part of your baggage, carrying that baggage becomes your payment. And you don't want to think about it, so you block it out. But if you could confront that and say, that's what I did at that time with the knowledge that I had, and forgive yourself, you can change history. You can change your point of view with respect to that history. And you say, that was a bad point in my life because I didn't learn about life properly, or I didn't get all the lessons that I needed. So that lesson becomes part of your DNA, and you can now carry that forward. So do you need to bring that lesson out every time, or at the appropriate time, you can choose to bring that lesson out. So, I did that before and I did it that way and it didn't work. Why didn't it work? And then you find out all the things that you need to do. And you say, I'm doing all the right things, but I'm not doing them in the right process. I'm not doing them in the right sequence. So this is where you get to choose. So this is where you get to play with your knowledge. You get to play with your understanding. And I use the word play because, if you do it this way, you say, oh, well, I'm doing all the things that the guy said. It's like you get a recipe book and you're going to make a dinner and you bring in all the elements together and, oh my God, that tastes so awful. And someone else brings it all together and it tastes wonderful. What happened? They had a little bit more knowledge. They knew how to use what they had and take advantage of it. And so this becomes one of the points of view that we have with respect to lack, the lack of what we have. So in other words, have what you need and need what you have. But if you look at the DNA, you have everything. So what do you need at this point in time? And then what do you need down the road? You need to have the trust that you will be able to choose that which you need at the appropriate time. And so you find that when you go to sleep at night, the soul is liberated to be able to do this functionality of making choices. But those choices involve other souls, because you are not independent. You are dependent. But you're dependent in an interdependent manner so that you can act independently. This is why when people want to control you, they are not only abusing you, but they're abusing themselves, because it consumes energy. And we don't need to do that, because the universe is a beneficial supplier. So the limitation that we have in terms of benefiting is based on our knowledge. And once we have that knowledge, then we can be discerning. We have to be discerning. We have to be discriminatory, not by race or color, but we need to be discriminatory in terms of what do we need to facilitate an inertia field and bring together the necessary forces for us to create what we want. So the best example is a marriage. And you have to look truly at the reasons for the marriage. And a couple who understands that the two rowing together in the same direction will create one very good family that will be a better family than two coming together for the sake of convenience. Because that changes. That is not a strong foundation to build on. When you have true intentions where my survival depends on you, so I want to do what's best for you to make sure that you survive. But, you know, when you're depending on an undependable, then you can't work that way. So you have to discriminate. That's all it is. And you don't beat them or punish them. You just avoid them. You seek refuge and seek where you don't have that contentious conflict, but you have that contention to vie for a common denominator that would bring peace in your life in such a way that you can bring peace in all those you come around. And it's not something that you do at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. You do it all day long. And that's where the peace dome comes in, because the earth is rotating. And so it's always on the move. The peace dome goes all around the earth. So wherever we are, we're in contact with that peace dome. And so that peace dome is an amalgamation of all of humanity. We are part of all of humanity. But we're not a soup. We are co-creators with the creator. And that's the beauty of our physicality. I better stop talking. I hope I
Thank you so much. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Anyone else have a thought or a question they'd like to voice? While you're thinking about that, again, Mr. Kesh was very complimentary towards the knowledge seekers. I'll just read something from about 2 hours and 11 minutes. This technology is going to see its biggest battles in the next 12 months on the international arena. 2025 is the year that I've decided it's time for change. And those who are around me and work with me closely, they know what I'm talking about. We do not fight. We just keep on introducing new technologies as people pick up the technologies. We are in there with you lot. You supported us. You knowledge seekers in every shape or form in the past years stood there. We put GANs out. You tested it. We put systems out. You came, volunteered to use it. You as knowledge seekers have done such a great job of unforgettable work for humanity. You will understand your positions in the coming time. Unconditionally, how many of you took everything and taught everything? And 2025 is the time because we done all the testing. You look at it. We've done the agricultural tests. We've done the health test. We've done the material production test. Everything is done. Now this year, we bring it into the market in a very big way. In a very, very big way. We relied on you up to now on you knowledge seekers to support us by buying a system, supporting us with trials and everything else. We still carry on doing that because this way we stay untainted. Nothing can interfere with our work. So thank you all, each and every one of the knowledge seekers who are here or not here. But again, I think the soul understands what Mr. Kesh is saying here. So we thank you all for being, or as he said in the past, carrying a small corner of this very, very large carpet. And in a very short time, you'll understand your positions in the coming time. Anyone else want to make a comment or voice a thought?
Can I add one thing then, please, while people are thinking?
Sure.
In the face of disaster, there are some people that run away, but there are other people that run towards it. And there's a reason for that. And it has to do with a skill set and an understanding. So when in the statement that you just made that everyone's going to have a realization and a fulfillment of their position. Well, it's not a position like a bullfrog sitting on a, lily pad. It's a position where you have a responsibility for the betterment of the planet. And this is the thing that is confounding to me, especially when people talk about population control and stuff like that. Your business, your survival depends on having really more customers or better customers. And so the business of killing your customers is kind of counterproductive. And so like eventually you'll be out of business. And would that matter to you? Well, it does, because now that lesson of life and that action becomes ingrained, embedded within your DNA. So, you become less because you have to spend more energy now. So we really have to discriminate as to what kind of baggage we want to carry. And it's a lot better to not to create the mess than it is to clean up the mess. But we all know that when we clean up the mess, it's a lot better. So we have two purposes. One is to clean up the mess of others because it's our home. And we need to teach them how to clean up their mess to keep our home clean. And because that's how the world works. When you look into the universe, it's well organized. And if you ask us, why is my life not well organized? Well, we're just not looking at what causes the disorganization. That manifestation is an inertia field of what has brought it to. And if we change that, then we will change the manifestation. So all of it is there. We're just not using the right things in the right places. You know, putting the square peg in the round hole. Well, if the square peg is small enough, it can go into the round hole. And obviously the same is true for the round peg into the square hole. But those are allowances that you have to make, which is what kind of makes life interesting. And it's a lot of fun, isn't it? Except when there's a lot of abuse and pain inflicted, and that's no longer fun. So this is the thing that we have to work at. We have to be more skillful. And why not? I mean, is someone going to argue with me that, you know, we need to be more skillful at having fun? If we don't have a competition, you know, what does Brazil love? They love their soccer team. And when they win, they party. Okay. But that's a contention. That's a competition. And so are both teams partying, or just the winning team is partying? Which means that the losing team is not partying. But, you know, when we were playing and we were playing as old timers, we didn't play with that contention. We played with contention during the game, but the thing was that we were playing with friends, and then after the game, we could go all have a party, and most of us didn't really know the score. We didn't care because we had fun playing. And that's the difference between what you see in our society, where we reward the winner, we reward the beauty, and we make everything into a competition. You know, oh, you're a better lover than, you know, someone else or whatever. Like, how do you measure that? You know, it's like the Georgia Peach wanting to measure how much her husband loves her. And, you know, maybe he loves her a Mercedes Benz, or maybe he loves her, you know, a Toyota Celica. I don't know. How much does he love her? But that's all physical. So when you are interdependent, and that interdependence is totally dependable, that brings peace and harmony. So, Mark, you are totally dependable. Every Sunday, you lead our group here. And it's my wish to be dependable as well.
You are. We all are.
We all are.
He went on to say, Alex, while he was looking for the picture of the gas unit, you've been with me like a rock, and you stood by us like everything else, good and bad. You've been there. You lost money with us when we trusted people. You helped us when we stood there. Let me go and show you something, this is where he's looking for the picture of the gas unit, which you knowledge seekers will understand what this means. But just be patient, because it's your achievement more than us. It's what we, as knowledge seekers, and you, as stood there supporting us with everything else. And then he goes on to show the picture.
Yeah, because the undependability is corrected. Okay, so if you keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result, then that's idiocy. So, you know, we made a mistake, we corrected it. Okay, fine. We fell down, we got up. Okay, we didn't feel sorry for ourselves. It's just, you know, it's too bad. It could have been better. But now comes the new situation. Well, let's make sure that it's better. Use what we learned and add to it. That's what he always talks about, adding to the knowledge. Okay, so whatever knowledge we have in the physicality, and whether it's, backwards or forwards, it all is contributing to the future. So we now know how not to do things. Okay, so it's an important lesson to learn. And it's not a critique as to how efficient you are at learning it. Oh, you took 5 years. Oh, you took 5 minutes. Well, it's a different skill set, but you're on the right path. Okay, so we need to grasp at those things, and they're not just straws. We need to be gentle with ourselves. We need to be forgiving. I have a drug addict coming, okay, and his big problem is he's making excuses. And I said, what is the common excuse that you're making? And that excuse is the excuse of changing things. You're always excusing for a cause of a problem, but you're never excusing for the cause of a solution. Focus on the solution. Forget the problem. Don't make excuses. Oh, I was late because I missed the bus. Well, did you get there? Yes, I got there. Okay, well, that's the thing. You learn how to deal with that. Focus on being able to get there. Don't focus on missing the bus. But, we've come to a point now where we're going through a paradigm shift. And we're all here, and we recognize that it's important. That's why we're giving our time and attention to this. These meetings are long, but they're jam-packed with knowledge and information and sharing. So this is our reward. You cannot get without the giving. And it's not a form of punishment. It's just a matter of what is it that you need, and you go there and get it. I can't go to all the classes. I go to wherever I go, but wherever I am, that's where I am. Okay, not where I'm not. I am where I am, and the determination is to be here with you all. That's my commitment. And so I have to respect myself for making that commitment, because it's important. I think it's important. Otherwise, I wouldn't make that commitment. What's the point? So this is, I can't preach, dependability without being an example. But, I try, I sometimes try and say, well, you should be dependable. I don't know what it means. Okay, well, let me lead by example. They still don't get it. Okay, well, let me be undependable. Then they start complaining and say, well, you should be dependable, and then you won't have anything to complain about. Oh, no, I like complaining. And then you say, oh, wait a second, I got it all wrong. I thought it would be natural for them to be dependable. But for them, it's natural to be a complainer. Okay, not my bag. Sorry, I'm out of there. You carry that baggage and you enjoy it. I'm going to go a different path. So thank you all for allowing me to continue presenting. And we're looking forward to a radical change tomorrow. North and South America needs help, serious help. Let's all pray for peace.
Okay, very good. And on that note, I didn't bring this up before, but we'll just bring it up again to continue to Again, join us at the 9 p.m. Central European time or Central European summertime. And it's for us and the public. Anyone who's heard this for the first time, you're welcome to join us in this process. And as we said earlier, no one fails this test, where we join on the energy dimension at 9 p.m. Central European time, and you'll have to calculate that out for yourself, what that means to you, for the elevation of the souls of all leaders and soul of the totality of the Kesh Foundation, creating peace in everything that exists. Again, you can spend a nanosecond or 1 minute, whatever you'd like to do, but join us and start exploring your energy dimension, which is your true nature, as opposed to what I've always thought the physicality was the top dog. And this was the beginning and the end of everything in a way. But now we know there's a much bigger structure of work within our understanding. And of course, we'll bring the other ones along for the same reason. And just like to say thank you. And I think if you join in this process, if I can just share these screens here, and let's just go to this one, which we've, of course, shown you before. By joining in that work and elevating the soul of the planet, I think you'll be very proud of the work you do. You'll be proud of the person you are, and you'll be proud of the difference you're making on this planet and throughout the universe. And of course, this will instill the work of Mitra, or the understanding of the idea of thinking good, speaking good, and doing good. So it all, in a way, works together. We don't quite understand the big picture yet, but we will as we're moving along. So I want to thank you all, as Mr. Kesh did, for all your support, whether you've just joined us in the last minute or you've been here for a decade or more in this work. Again, we're all carrying a very small corner of a very large carpet. So thank you all for your work. Mr. Kesh is pleased. Oftentimes I wonder, he's a master chess player, Alex, and I wonder, does he get kind of bored not finding someone to play against at his level? When you're an expert, you really don't like playing with people that don't really understand the game. It's not so challenging. It's quite boring. So I wonder, where does he go to, in a way, get challenged? Or does he need to be? Maybe he doesn't need that at all. But you know what I'm saying?
None of us are alone.
Hello?
None of us are alone.